Welcome to Gold Derby's TV Sound Panel. I am Senior Editor Marcus James Dixon, and we are here with Patrick Hogan, Supervising Sound Editor on Netflix's Cobra Kai. So Patrick, when you started production for season 5, what was your main challenge in bringing something new and innovative to the show's sound design for that penultimate year?
That really was, you kind of just listed what the challenge was, which was stay true to the show, right? Like, we have a very, very loyal, awesome fan base. So, I think it was in the writing and the production and post-production editing, and even the sound was, how do we give the fans what they want and stay true to that Cobra Kai feel and vibe, but also not just, give them a repeat of what we've heard and seen prior. So like in the episode that we submitted, we have another tournament, but there's a spin on this tournament, and that it's a private tournament just between two dojos fighting for the right to compete in this huge international tournament. So the stakes are higher, but the sound was actually a little bit smaller. The scope was smaller because they were fighting just in a dojo. And we couldn't rely on a big crowd to give us the energy of the scene, because it was just the two dojos, and half the people didn't cheer when something good happened to the other fighter, if you know what I mean, right? We couldn't have everybody cheering at once because they were, enemies. So it was a lot of like just little sound, little design things that we usually didn't have space for. We did a lot more, kind of low end textures, and they did a little bit more, I think, with kind of slow-mo and speed ramping in some of the fight scenes, because now we're at the point where we know that the people who are fighting are really, really good at karate. And so they can kind of get more into some of the cool moves. We did a little sound design moment. There's a moment, I don't know if anybody even caught it, but when Sam's fighting in that against Tori, she does a move that she learned from Chosen. And we never see him teach it, and we never even talk about it. But back in episode 2, at the end of that episode, when we see him fight, he does the move when he's fighting, and then she does the same move. So it's not one of those things like everybody's going to like notice it and like recognize it, but it's those little details like that. So we gave it a little extra sound tweak. Fortunately, it's been like a year, so I can't remember exactly what that tweak was, but we did a little thing to kind of emphasize, like, here's what's making these students so special. They're learning from now, not one master, not 2 masters, but 3 different masters they have 3 senseis who are teaching them. And here's Sam pulling off something that Chosen taught her. So little things like that, which again, it started all the way back with the writing, and we carried it all the way through to the sound stage.
And there's really, really impressive fight scene that takes place in the apartment complex between Miguel and Robbie. It's not just how well done the scene was, but what it means for the two characters who they're antagonistic toward each other. And this is the moment where they kind of gain respect for each other again. What can you reveal about that scene from the sound department's perspective?
Sure, that was so I believe that was the end of episode 5. And what's great is
extreme measures.
Yeah. Cobra Kai is kind of always designed to kind of have 2 5-episode season arcs. So episode 5 always has a big ending. There's also at the end of episode 5 a thing with Daniel. I don't know, for those, I don't want to. I guess everybody's seen it already, but yeah, the first fight between Daniel and Terry Silver. So the first 5 episodes, there was a Daniel arc, which leads them in a dark place. In the first 5 episodes, there was an arc between Miguel and Robbie, which had been building for seasons and seasons and seasons. And so one of the things that was challenging about that was not only was it kind of a long fight, and it also veered. Usually when we do the fights, the idea is that these are trained martial artists. We do an extra pass in Foley to, I call it the crisp cloth pass, which I talked to the Foley artist about, which is to give it that sense that the moves are very precise and not sloppy, right? They're doing kicks and punches that they've practiced hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So we want to give it this different feel. So on all the tournaments and whenever they're training, and even when they're fighting, but this one gets sloppy. The whole point is it's an emotional fight. It's not a tournament fight. And so we didn't do a lot of the things that we normally do in the fights. We didn't add that crispness. The punches got a little sloppy, a little meatier, just to show that it was more of a brawl than an actual tournament fight. And then the other thing that was a real challenge about it was the set that day, I don't know what happened. It was truck moving day, apparently. When they filmed this, and we had to loop the whole thing. So that's all ADR. So all the dialogue at the end, when they're having this big emotional moment, we were really worried because it's every actor's worst nightmare. A big emotional, like this is the end of 3.5 seasons of character development, and we're going to have to ADR all the lines. But Sholo and Tanner are like, they're really, I mean, they're very young, very talented actors, and they did a great job. And I don't think anybody watched the scene and went, oh, well, they recreated that on the stage after the fact. So I was very proud of that.
No, I couldn't even tell. I rewatched the episode last night. I had no idea. You fooled me.
Okay, good. One down,
Um,
10 million to go.
Yeah, the fight you mentioned between Daniel LaRusso and Terry Silver in Stingray's house, there were some bone breaks noises and some nose cracks. You know, how do you go about making those sound so authentic?
Well, usually, as with most punches, it's always comprised of multiple elements. Because the final decisions are made on the stage in conjunction with the mixers and the executive producers, I've talked to them and I kind of know where they're leaning towards what they want in any given scene. But I always have to provide enough material so that if they zig at the last moment when we thought they were zagging, we're covered. I once had to cut 10 salt shakers sounds for Johnny because Josh was like, that's not the right sound. His salt shaker wouldn't make that sound. Like they can be very precise, which is awesome. I love it. So there were different elements. So there was a low end, there was a kind of meteor. Then there was, and I think on one of them, I don't remember which punch it was, they said that crack's not quite right. And so I kind of dug through, I've become used to this over the years with them. I kind of dug through a lot of different sounds that I thought would cut through the rest of the mix. This is a big score show. Zach and Leo write this great epic music. And usually for the 2 finale episodes, 5 and 10, they actually get an orchestra. So it's really lush and big. And so sometimes finding the right frequencies that will work with the music and cut through, find out where in the music do we have a space to kind of slip in this important sound. So it was really just balancing all those things until we got the level where it came through. And it was probably a little bit big, but that's kind of the Cobra Kai way. It's realism, and then we take it up one notch from there. But also it was supposed to be Terry Silver is a mean guy, and he's going to hurt Daniel Russo, hurt him to the point where he basically quits and gives up. And so that was very intentional to make sure it sounded very brutal and maybe bigger. And maybe Daniel should have been in the hospital a little bit longer after that fight. But that's kind of how we do it. We kind of have the different layers, and then we kind of adjust them until we feel like we've hit the right sweet spot with them.
Yeah. And you were nominated at the Emmys for the past 2 seasons of Cobra Kai. What do you remember most about those Emmy experiences? Were you able to attend the ceremonies?
It was so proud. Cobra Kai is a big show with big heart and a small budget. Like it started as this little show that nobody knew about. And it was kind of like big IP, but no one knew if this was really going to take off. So it's always been done very small. And what we accomplish with basically kind of almost like a sitcom level budget is, it blows my mind. So to get recognized and get to go was really something. The first year was the year of the pandemic, and it was it was the second year. So it was you could attend, but you couldn't bring anybody, and there was no party, there was no food or drink or anything. It was really just you got to sit there and take it in and experience it. But then last year was the return of, I got to impress my wife and wear a nice suit, and I got dressed up and got to go have fun and got to see other people that we hadn't seen in years because of the pandemic having kept us all kind of working remotely. So it was great to get to see the teams for the other shows and, talk afterwards and eat and laugh and talk. And that part, the communal aspect of it, was the part that I love the most. I missed that.
And is there anything you can tease about season 6? It's the last season. Fans are going to be very, very, emotional.
Season 6 is gonna be epic. I keep myself intentionally in the dark about a lot of things because I'm a fan. I'm also a fan of Ted Lasso. I just want to say I love that show. So shout out to Ted Lasso. I'm a huge fan of the show. So one, I kind of like being surprised. And then two, I kind of like it whenever possible watching a show, an episode kind of fresh because my ears don't know what's coming. And so I can provide some real honest feedback on what sounds are working, what sounds aren't working. Is that line of dialogue clear? Is it not clear? Sometimes I have to read a script ahead of time, but a lot of times I try to be surprised. So I don't know for sure, but I know it's going to be big. And I also can say this, Cobra Kai never dies. Just because Cobra Kai is ending doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of that world. So just remember, Cobra Kai never dies.
That is an amazing tease. And thank you for chatting with us, Patrick. We will see you in a little bit at the group panel.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to Gold Derby's TV Sound Panel. I am Senior Editor Marcus James Dixon, and we are here with Ben Barker, Supervising Sound Editor, Designer on Apple TV Plus's 5 Days at Memorial. Ben, the first episode of the series, Day One, is the one that's being submitted in the sound categories at the Emmy Awards. And this is probably the loudest, most in your ears episode of the show because it is literally a recreation of Hurricane Katrina hitting New Orleans. Did you feel a lot of pressure taking on such an important project?
Yeah, absolutely. Number one, it was a very, true story, obviously, because it was something that happened. So we had to be very careful about how we approached it. We had to think about the reality of it and everything that went into it. So yeah, it was.
And talk a little about the sounds of the storm, how they started out calmly in that first episode, and then they start building to that, ear-splitting crescendo at the conclusion.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, when we saw the whole series, we kind of had to look at it from day one to day 5. Those were the episodes which were centered around the hospital. And we had to use a certain point in episode 1, which was the Sky Bridge, as our kind of eye of the storm. So we had to build up to that point. That was our loudest, most intense moment. And then from there, as each day had its story, we had to then implement the sound from there. So yeah, day 1 was our sort of big moment. In designing the storm, it's something that we had to break down a lot because a hurricane, you don't stand outside and record it, you run for cover. So we had to listen to a lot of real footage of those and then break down each element. So there was sort of lots of whistling wind sounds which were coming off the buildings and city landscape, which we recreated, as well as the sort of low rumbling tones, and then the actual sheer brute force of the storm, the real sort of gusting elements to it. We had a storm here in the UK which was nowhere near as close, obviously, to the devastation that Hurricane Katrina caused, but we had a bit of prior notice on that through the weather forecast, and we managed to mic up the building I'm in now, our main cutting room at Sound 24 here at Pinewood Studios, to try and capture those whistling sounds and the deep turning metal sounds, which was something that helped us to try and recreate that storm.
That's amazing. I didn't realize you actually, recorded a storm in your own area in order to get those sounds.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, it just sort of, it coincided, and like I say, it was nothing of the force and devastation of Katrina, but it did give us a chance to try and pick out those elements which I talked about, which we'd seen from the live footage of Katrina. So we were able to put some mics up in the corner of buildings and inside our roof and stuff, just to get some real sort of natural shaking and whistling and rumbles.
And there's this scene toward the end of that first episode where there's an older man, he's looking out the window of the hospital, and there's a lot of quick cuts between him looking out, and then I think it's real footage of Katrina. Okay? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, that was just sort of a scene where it happens a couple of times in the show, but I think certainly in day 1, but I think that moment is just highlighting how violent and devastating that storm was outside. We did the producers did a lot of quick cutting there, so we were trying to match that with the sound, where it's just, again, sort of a violent sound, quick, hard, nasty, you know, just to show the sheer force of what this storm was doing to New Orleans. We kind of, when we were watching videos of storms, you don't really appreciate what Mother Nature can produce, and it's obviously very devastating, but the sheer impact of it and the sound of it is incredible.
And the scariest scene of that episode, you already mentioned the walkway bridge that was being bombarded on all sides. I felt like I was there. It was almost like a Disneyland ride gone wrong or something. What was that moment like, you know, designing the sounds for that bridge?
Yeah, well, that again was kind of like a learning curve for us, that one. We initially thought it would be just a cacophony of noise, but we found out through, you know, speaking to people that, again, the metal would turn. You would hear high winds coming through the broken windows. There would be glass moving around. And we tried to, the scene just prior to that was in a stock room where one of the nurses is hiding. At that point, we had to sort of make it nice and quiet to then get that massive impact as you come out onto that sky bridge. So we kind of were very wary. That was our eye of the storm. That moment was our big, the biggest moment that we would be hitting. Certainly in episode 1, but like I say, from days 1 to 5.
At the start of episode 2, we actually see the levees break and the water comes pouring into the city. It felt very much like a blockbuster disaster movie. And, you know, sonically speaking, how did you pull off that moment?
Well, yeah, again, it's kind of like we had to break it down, you know, so just through the visuals, you want to see the telegraph poles coming down, you know, electricity poles coming down. You want to hear the sheer force of that water taking down the sort of concrete wall. I mean, you know, the force of this can lift up houses and move it. So we were conscious of trying to keep a very weighty sound to that, as well as a very detailed sound. You know, you're hearing these individual moments of destruction, as well as having this sort of sheer force of nature behind it. So yeah, we kind of tried to sort of cover both angles of sound, really, sort of the high end and the low end, and yeah, try to get the story across that way.
At the end of the 4th day, a character describes what's going on inside the hospital as the constant sound of misery. And the sound department, you know, how do you go about accomplishing the feat of making viewers hear misery?
Yeah, well, it was just sort of there was kind of 2 approaches to that. We had the general decay of the building, so it had obviously been through the storm, but then there was the aftermath of that. So the building was sort of straining under the pressure of what Katrina left behind. But also the main point of that was the unfortunate loss of life and people who were seriously ill in there. So we had to work very closely with our loop group there to almost to perform the story themselves by, we used coughing a lot and sort of groaning, and the general sort of misery that comes with that. By that point, I think, if my memory serves me right, the power was starting to go out. So again, it was just it was getting starker. And I think when you single out sound like that, you kind of hyper focus on it. So you're feeling what the character's feeling and feeling what the audience is feeling.
Mm. And did you get to go on set at all? I know it was filmed in Canada and also in New Orleans as well.
No, unfortunately, we didn't. We're based over here in the UK, so
Gotcha.
that was a shame. But yeah.
Well, you were previously nominated at the Emmy Awards for Devs in 2020, and I'm just curious. Final question here: what would it mean to get recognized for this project? I mean, 5 days of Memorial, it's so important. I hope everyone goes out and watches it.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an important story, and to work on it was an absolute honor, and to be nominated it for be an even bigger honor. But I think because of it's such a true and, you know, emotional story, to be recognized for something like that would be, you know, would be feel very proud about it.
Well, thank you so much, Ben, and we'll see you at the group panel at the end.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Welcome to Gold Derby's TV Sound panel. I am Senior Editor Marcus James Dixon, and we are here with Paul Shubat, the re-recording mixer on Netflix's Cabinet of Curiosities. Paul, first of all, how amazing is it working with a living legend like Guillermo del Toro? Is that one of the big reasons you wanted to do this project?
Two-part question. Yeah, working with Guillermo is you're working alongside a master. I mean, his way around sound is pretty phenomenal. He can dissect hundreds of tracks that he's not aware of, and then be able to direct you as long as you pay attention, because he will rattle off very quickly a lot of things that need to happen for him to get to where he wants to be with the scene. So much of it is story driven. He's not afraid to eliminate and create depth sonically, and that's something that I learned from him. It's easy in some of the genre things for us to get to a wall where there's not enough dynamic, and his sense of theatrical as well. He brings so much of that knowledge of filmmaking to the table that you just, you know, you get there, and then he can sort of take the wheel, and you execute his things, and then you sit back and we all look at each other in the theater and go, wow, we thought we nailed it to show him. And with this project, there were 8 different directors with 8 different composers. There were 8 basically small films, and all the directors are all feature film directors. So they bring an aesthetic and a demand for detail that we sometimes don't get in maybe episodic television and that sort of thing, because, you know, it is what it, there's time constraints, there's certain things like that, where some of these feature filmmakers, it's kind of not over until they say it's kind of over. And so there was a bit of that. And then Guillermo, after they had sort of like a director's cut in picture, then Guillermo would come in with the their executive team, and review it and then make the appropriate changes. And that may even mean in the final playback, we're thinking that's the case, he may actually say, we're going to re-edit picture and reshoot, like things like that, where so it was a very much, we had to be pretty agile on the stage. There was no kidding. And the directors that were a part of it were all over the world. Some in one in Australia. It's so that we were dealing with time zones. It was a challenge in that regard, but incredibly satisfying. I mean, because you're not glued to even one vision. It's okay, we did that one, and they were all 8 were kind of in flux until the very end. And that, although it being a little bit nerve-wracking, it can also be incredibly exciting, because you're kind of working on 8 visions, and then it gets presented on Netflix as, you know, as we will do. I think it was presented in 2 films a night over 4 nights. And upon seeing in that regard, it's like, it's a bit of a ride, because they're so different. Each story is quite different, different times, different things, different aesthetic.
And the episode you're submitting for the Emmy Awards is the same one you were nominated for at the Cinema Audio Society Awards, episode 3, The Autopsy, directed by David Pryor. And just from a broad perspective, what makes this episode stand out to you from the angle of the sound department?
There's a little bit of everything in it. There's the real world. There's very much practical stuff. So you have incredible sound team, me being re-recording mixer, the incredible sound team up front, Foley, ADR, the sound dogs that delivered. A part of our sound team was also in the UK, Bernard O'Reilly, Paul Gurman, some great talents that brought just great stuff. I have to give that shout out to them. And to your point, in Autopsy, the reason I say that is because there's kind of everything. It's real world in a period piece. And then it goes into, you know, somewhere else. It's kind of, so as from a sound perspective, it has kind of it all. You've got massive dynamic, but you also have very delicate real world things wrapped around some incredible score. And in that, by the end, you're into, it was more of an interesting monster. We're into the voice work that they had to do on Joe Allen was incredible. They recorded his ADR, the whole thing's ADR for him, and he's recorded at an extremely high rate, bitrate, so that it could be manipulated without any aliasing. A lot of science went into some of that stuff too, so that it wasn't just kind of the same thing. We're just going to pitch shift and we're going to do things that have been done, you know, generally previously and effectively in many movies and television shows. But they were trying to, and David Pryor was really pushing that team to that. And as far as effects, you kind of have a bit of everything. You have Dottie by the end. No, sorry, that's a different film. I got myself mixed up there. So excuse me. That when we were on in the Autopsy labs, there was so much delicate work and hand holding between sound design and score where you can't really tell where one starts and the other one finishes. And then we get into Joe Allen the monster, but there's explosions, there's high intensity stuff, there's and that's why I think we chose that one, because as far as a piece, it kind of displays a whole lot of discipline within filmmaking, and that's why we picked that one.
The autopsy scenes with F. Murray Abraham, the great F. Murray Abraham, they
Yes.
just feel so realistic and filled with so many slices and cuts and stitches. How do you go about making sure that all of those sounds were so authentic?
That was a lot of work, Foley particularly. We didn't just dive in with the sounds that were originally delivered. We, as Guillermo and David pursued, it needed to feel like it was authentic, but very much not authentic. That is frozen pigskin leather, his movement, the breaking of all his bones and things as he was that's all frozen real animal material and a vegetable. I think that Goro, Foley artist, described it as every day it looked like a bear ran through a salad bar and it exploded in the Foley stage. And he said, that's how you know it's a good track. Because it was so there was a lot of elements that went into that, and then a lot of manipulation of those elements to get it so that, like you say, it's tactile, it's close, but it's not just all swish, if you know what I mean. You can, a lot of movies in the genre, it turns into very just wet and squishy, that needed to have a solid nature. It needed to have a bit of that wetness. It needed to have all those things because the bodies were dead and frozen as well. But then they were reanimated with the alien. So we've got an alien story wrapped inside a period piece, inside of all this, inside of an autopsy room where there's two principal characters with one slicing the other one itself up, and it's crazy stuff, but fascinatingly interesting.
And I love the moment where we go into his body and we hear all of the synapses firing and the electricity whirring.
Yeah.
Was that a bit of a challenge to get all of that, correct? I say correct as if I know what it sounds like for real.
For sure. And also really interesting in that, because there's, all of a sudden we go from real world. Now we're inside like I don't know, like an IMAX movie, going inside some kind of a thing where it's all around us. And of course we mixed in Atmos and everything. And if you ever have an opportunity to hear it in that form, it's pretty fantastic. We go completely 360 that you can actually, if you turn backwards to the other direction, back to the you'll still feel like you're, if the screen was there, it would still work. We're in the ceiling and everything. And it was just, as VFX came in, as they do with these things, our tracks evolved. And we just wanted to make sure that it once again was dynamic with the score, and that it worked as a full large piece. But then we go completely silent as you're traveling, and then it just goes and we fall off, and then it's just Abrams' voice in 360, more than 360 everywhere. Yeah, ceiling everywhere. And it all of a sudden you're kind of inside the head, and we just had to be careful to make sure that some of those details did get caught. And thank you for noticing.
Well, it's such a great episode, and I love a good anthology show, and this is one of the best ones on television. So thank you so much for talking with us today, Paul.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Gold Derby's TV Sound Panel. I am Senior Editor Marcus Dixon, and we're here with Brent Findley, Supervising Sound Editor on Apple TV Plus's Ted Lasso. Brent, you are a 2-time Emmy nominee for Ted Lasso Season 1 and Season 2. Tell us about what those experiences were like for you, being nominated by your peers in the sound branch.
I can't even, I don't know what words there are to describe that, besides just being, a few inches off, floating a few inches off the ground the whole time. It's just very flattering, humbling. There's so much good material out there. Everybody's is just bringing their best work to the table. And so to be acknowledged by that, by everyone in the sound community for that was really, really an honor, and just speechless about it.
And moving on to Season 3, which is airing now on Apple, the 6th episode is called Sunflowers, and that's the one that's being submitted in the sound categories for this year's Emmys. And this was the one that was set in Amsterdam. It kind of felt like a mini movie. All the characters had their own storylines. Is that how you approached it as a movie, basically?
Oh, absolutely. Every episode this season feels like it has a movie arc, where all the episodes have a longer runtime. But the Amsterdam episode, especially, it's a road trip for the team. They go on the road. They're out of town, so it's a little. I think we're barely in if at all, in the locker room and Ted's office at all. So we go to this new location, and it's a chance for everybody to kind of explore parts of their story that we don't get to when we're in Richmond. So it's definitely, and it had a different kind of feel to it. And it became the episode that was the dearest to our hearts as the sound team. So every episode is our favorite sound baby, of course. But there's always one or two a season that is very special. And for 306 for us, doesn't mean it wasn't necessarily the toughest editorially wise. There's some very complex game sequences, things that are just really knuckle down, figure this out technical sequences, but it is more of a musicality and a flow, and where we could craft the flow of the sound design and the soundscape. 306 was definitely brought all the feels for us as the sound team.
And as the characters are walking down the streets of Amsterdam in the red light district, what are some ambient sounds you had to work on that were new to the series?
Well, one thing for sure is the local language. So we had our loop group. We had to make sure our Walla group could all natively speak Dutch. So, and there's a little bit of an Easter egg throughout the series, or I'm sorry, throughout the episode, especially as Rebecca is on the bike path, and then as in the red light district, we have Higgins and our kit man going to the jazz club. Every time there's a bike that goes by, somebody yells something in Dutch at our tourists. And sometimes it's just tourist in Dutch. But we did a little thing where we took all the little expletives throughout the series in English and had our Dutch Walla group translate those into the versions that the Dutch person would say, like wanker, but what's the Dutch version of that? So there's a little shout out every time somebody almost gets run over by a bike. And it's just tucked in there. Not overt, not waving a flag about it, but it's a neat little localization that was fun to do.
Now I want to rewatch the episode with the Dutch person to translate.
Yeah.
You mentioned Rebecca Hannah Waddingham's character. She falls into the canal. So you had to, have all these water sounds, which is unusual for Ted Lasso. And then there's this new set piece where she goes on this mystery man's boat for the whole day. Can you tell us about those scenes?
Something that's very special about her falling off the bridge into the water. Our Foley team, Sana Kelly, and her Matt Salib and her team really did a great job with the water effects. There is, back in 303, Rebecca goes to see her mom's psychic. And during that process, she's getting these readings. Was something that Jason Sudeikis wanted us to do was travel through all of the emotional touchstones of that reading using crystal singing bowls through all the chakras that were going through that conversation. So every time there was something, and I say every time, we kind of take this trip from sacral to mind to heart, touching on every time we talk about family or we talk about love or we talk about the future or the unknown, we kind of dip in and out of those different chakras that speak to those different levels of our awareness. And so in that reading of 303, our psychic talks about Rebecca being upside down. And in 306, Rebecca goes upside down into the water. That's kind of a foreshadowing. And so we brought that chakra bowl back in sound design, which was, I got the note here. It's for the upside down, we use the sacral, which is centered. The chakral tones are not necessarily perfectly tuned to our Western tuning, but the closest is F for sacral and the heart is A. Those are kind of the central tones of that. So we kind of wove those in with Tom Howe's score. So sound design and score, we worked very well together to have those notes be sympathetic to each other instead of dissonant or running against each other. So that's just a neat little thing. It just dips its head in there just a little bit as she comes up out of the water, but it's a nice little touch. We specifically refrained from doing creaking and rocking inside the boat. We're so intimate in there, and for so long, we just didn't want to start that to call out and be a thing. We're kind of get out of the way of the story. And that's kind of one of our favorite things to do is, or maybe we'll set something up and then just get out of the way because the story and the acting is so good. We certainly don't want to impede that. We want to support that.
So fascinating. The most memorable scene in this episode is when Jason Sudeikis visits the American-themed restaurant, and he has this sort of psychedelic trance where he uncovers a new coaching method called total football. That must have been a really fun sequence to put together.
That was fantastic, and it took us weeks. We had so much back and forth because we're working hand in hand with the animation people. So every time the animation changed, Jason was getting versions of that. We'd do versions of the sound to speak to that to see how it all would work together. So from the moment I think we first start to dip into it, he gets the barbecue sauce, and we kind of go into this little muffle a moment into his head a little bit. He opens up the barbecue sauce, which is from Kansas City. Like, why did you pick this one? Because it's the best one, she says. And he's, we don't know that if he's under the influence of that wonderful tea Beard made or not. As we found out later, it was a dud batch. So however this happened, then he starts to envision these things. But before he even gets into that, we were able to get Marv Albert, to recall that 94 Bulls game to integrate, to make more obvious the triangle offense the Bulls were using. So in that actual call of that game, he didn't specifically, at that time, overtly discuss the triangle offense. So Marv was gracious enough to lend his vocal cords to redoing some of those lines and inserting some things specifically about the triangle offense into that broadcast, which is just a fantastic thing to be able to do. Yeah, and then he goes into this vision with the true spirit of adventure, which is the legendary Corey Burton of our wonderful old time animated cartoons like Rocky and Bullwinkle. He's got that beautiful voice. So so Ted has this conversation with, I guess, himself, however you translate that into being. But it was a delicate balance in Sean Byrne and Ryan Kennedy, our re-recording mixers, really definitely moved the sound effects and balanced the sound effects, the music, and the dialogue, trying to get it all to be intelligible and to follow, because we're actually learning something here. This is an educational portion of our episode. To still be able to understand everything, but also have a little point on some of these animations, which was very fun to do.
The bike scene where Jamie teaches Roy how to ride a bike. I mean, that's probably the funniest scene of the whole season. We're almost running out of time. Is there anything you can tell us about that from the sound department's perspective?
I think Foley had a wonderful time throwing a bike around. Sometimes they get to have fun. Yeah, and clanking and chunking on the pedals and things. When they're riding out on, I mean, it's just a wonderful bonding experience for them. And then when they're riding down the path, they're behind a cart, and so the cart was making more noise than the bike. So that was we didn't want to ADR that scene. It's so perfect the way they interact with each other. So it was a heavy duty combination of noise reduction and preserving the dialogue, but also then putting the bike sounds back in, because we we're focusing on the dialogue at the time, so we lose some of the practical effects trying to get rid of the noise around the dialogue. So then we got to put the bicycle sounds back in. So yes, it was Jason, his library is so deep of references he can pull from. And he told me what movie reference that bike scene is from, and I don't remember, but it's definitely one of those things where it's a nod. He's got a favorite list of movies that he does all these little nods to. So that was one of them.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us today. And there are millions of fans out there that hope the third season is not the end, that it continues on. And I know you probably can't say anything about that.
Well, I'm one of those fans too that hopes it continues on, because as a fan, I love the show too.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting with us today.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Gold Derby's TV Sound Panel. I am Senior Editor Marcus James Dixon, and we would like to welcome back Paul Shubat for Cabinet of Curiosities, Patrick Hogan for Cobra Kai, Ben Barker for 5 Days at Memorial, and Brent Findley for Ted Lasso. First of all, gentlemen, I would love to know from each of you, what would you consider to be your big break in Hollywood, and how was it, and was it always your dream to be working in the sound department for TV and film? Paul, let's start with you.
It's been a long road, as it is for probably all of the colleagues in this call here. Starting out on the music side of things some 41 years ago, and then moving through that and scoring and advertising and things, and moving into long form dramatic. It's been a series of opportunities, and every time you get a chance to be part of something that is great, or you hope it to be fantastic, it feels a bit honored to be part of those teams, and I continue to do that sort of stuff. Part of it is here in Canada, where some of the stuff might not be as readily known to the American audience, but then a lot of the stuff did, going back to, I was working with the executive producer on Cabinet that we worked together, I don't know, some 25 years ago on FX the series, which is some of the US broadcast stuff as well, and then features as well. So it's just been a series of opportunities, and you just hope that you can, as executive producer this week at some of the events that we were at, he said, don't F up, Shubat. It's kind of a bit of that. It's part of our thing, you have to continue to try to evolve as an artist, as a technician, as a collaborator, and all of these geniuses on this panel as well with these shows. No, it's not one opportunity. It's I think it's a question of being available to bring it kind of consistently with respect for the story and the craft. And you hope that if we get a nomination, fantastic. I mean, that's icing for sure.
And Patrick, what about you?
I came to LA to be a writer director, like everybody else probably. I came here to make my own films.
Nice.
I was at USC Film School, and I'm not a musician or did not have a music background. But in film school, you have to crew on other people's films. And when it was my turn, I decided I would pick the best film and take whatever position they had. And it happened to be sound. And I had worked in radio a little bit. So I had a little bit of sound background, and it was a good call because the film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Student Film. So, being on the best project in whatever capacity sometimes can be good advice, I guess. Pick good material and work hard. But my mentor was Roger Pardee, who's now head of the LMU sound program. If any of you know Roger, he's a great guy. And he said, you're really good at this. And after I did that film, I started getting paid offers to do sound on other people's projects. And I was looking at my friends who were cinematographers and picture editors, and they were all still working for free. And I was getting money, and I went, there's something here. And I ended up getting in as a Y16A in the union, which for those who know is like I built shelves. The first job I had as a union worker in this town was building shelves for a new sound company. And I kind of worked my way up through the company. And the great thing is I still get to write and direct my own little side projects and do the things that I want creatively for myself. And I like to think it helps me as a sound supervisor because I get the language often when they say purple, which is a big, oh no, sometimes I can actually figure out what they mean by that because I can kind of put on the filmmaking hat and go, okay, well, if I didn't know sound and I was just trying to talk as a filmmaker, what would I be meaning by this? And so I think it's kind of helped me having a broad knowledge of the different, divisions within film and television.
And Ben, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up just in love with film, really. I just enjoyed watching cinema. And I knew I'd wanted to work in the industry in some capacity. And again, a bit by luck, really, I just found a small company in Soho, and I started off as a runner, just making cups of tea and building shelves and other things. And I just fell in love with sound. At an early age, I didn't realize what an impact it can have on a film and how it can change an audience, its perception of the film, and how it can engross an audience's perception. So yeah, I just sort of fell in love with it at that point. And I got to sort of work shadow quite a few sound designers and mixers at that time. And I've never really done anything else. So I had to sort of continue this path because my grades wouldn't take me anywhere else. But yeah, I've enjoyed it ever since. And every new project that comes up, I've still reminds me, even though there's late nights and notes and stuff like that, it reminds me how much I enjoy this job and how lucky I am to be able to do it. It's sound is a wonderful tool to support image, and yeah, just a great bit of cinema.
And you, Brent?
As far as like break in the industry, I guess I would go back to something I think of just in life in general, but it's forks in the road. It's like we all have to make decisions. We're presented with options, and you just, based on what you know at the time, you make what you think is the best decision, and you find yourself later, maybe it's in hindsight, did I take the right fork or not? But this isn't my first career. I thought I was going to be in the music side of things. In my dreams, I was going to, tour, be a touring musician, make it big, go triple platinum. But in the meantime, I had other jobs, a bachelor's degree in IT, network administration. My wife and I had a house in Michigan, and in my basement, which Michigan is good for, is I had a studio, and I was going to make records, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I kept saying someday, and my wife finally said, either put up or shut up. Quit talking about someday do it or don't do it. And so we sold everything, went to Florida to school for a year, moved out here with our car on a trailer and a U-Haul, and started from scratch, making coffee, soldering cables. And one of my first gigs was as in production sound as an intern, feeding and watering the sound crew. And little did I know at that time, because I didn't even know. I mean, I was thinking sound was music. And then during school, I was presented, oh, you can actually synchronize sound to picture, and here's this whole other world. And the light bulb went off. I'm like, I could do that. I can do all day. I love music so much. I was always on the fence about, do I want that to be my job? Because what if it starts to become a grudge to do, yet I still have to do it to live on. So I'm like, okay, I can do music in my free time. By the way, there is no free time. So that clicked. The sound for picture clicked. Moved out here, started from scratch, and forks in the road. That first gig was on the Bill Lawrence show, of all things. And so here I am. Was it? When was that? 2006 maybe. However many years later, working on a Bill Lawrence show, and it's been. At the time I was presented to do Ted Lasso, I had other choices, really high profile choices to choose from, which is a tough problem to have, right? And you don't know which one to pick because I couldn't do everything. But because of my history with Kip Kroger, who he was, I think, a post supervisor on Scrubs when I was an intern. So we kind of met and hit it off. And so it was that relationship that really made me say yes to Ted Lasso and say no to the other shows that didn't have quite the depth of relationship with. So, I mean, that's a fork in the road, right? And so if you think of break, like what's your break in Hollywood? What does that mean? Is it just, maybe it's just awareness or high profile? Because I would be doing this whether anybody was aware of what I did or not. I would just, don't tell anybody, but I might do it for free. So it's in my blood. I absolutely love it. I live for it. So, so just to be able to do something that other people recognize and it's a hit, the show is the sum of all of the parts, and it's not lost on me that a show like Ted Lasso, specifically Ted Lasso, was going to be a hit with or without my contribution. Somebody was going to do the sound. It is such a good show. I think we can elevate it. There's so many shows we're just trying to get to zero just to make it watchable. And then there's other shows that, I mean, you could put up the OMF and everyone would love the show. And so what we get to do then is then elevate it and take it to this next level and get people to cry, get people to laugh, get people to want to watch the next episode. And it's the sum of bringing everybody's talents together from every department that locks that in and makes that work. So that's just forks in the road, I guess. You just don't know what it's going to be till you look back and go, I guess I made that choice. There have been plenty of shows I took a fork and someone else got the show and then they went and got Emmys. And but I don't claim to say, oh, I would have gotten an Emmy if I took that show. No, I could have screwed it up maybe. I don't know.
Another group question for everyone. I'd love to know, are there any misconceptions that viewers have about what you all do behind the scenes, or is there something that maybe you do that nobody really knows that you do? How about Patrick? Do you want to start us off?
Well, always the first conception is when they hear I'm the supervising sound editor, they start trying to give me their music demos and talk music. I think everybody can agree with that one. And I have to explain, no, that the music editor is tied to the composer, and it's a different, they kind of, it's just I do everything except that. I'm part of the mix team. So when we're mixing, I have, thoughts and comments on music, but not preparing it. And I think the other thing is a lot of people don't realize how much work, like you don't just take a track that you recorded in the camera on set and then just put it on the stage. And you don't just cut a couple, like some dog barks and the gunshot, and put it, I don't think a lot of people realize how many, when I tell people that Cobra Kai, a small show, delivers about 120 tracks to the stage, they're like, oh my God, they have no clue the amount of work and how fast we do it. I mean, hats off to everybody in TV, everybody on this panel and all that. To me, it's a miracle that stuff looks and sounds as good as it does with the time we're given to do it. We're pulling miracles off every single week. And hopefully if we do a good job, no one even notices. That's
Exactly.
that's probably why they don't realize it, right? Like everybody does a great job, and in the end, it just sounds like a single track that's just playing through their speakers. That's how it was on set, and so when we do our job well, they don't even know all that hard work goes into it.
That's a good point, actually. And Ben, how about you?
Yeah, I'd sort of echo that really. I think it's people think that the sound of the car chase or the gunshot or whatever, has come straight from the set. And it's all perfect, it works. So I think that's obviously a bit of a misconception there. And I think it's how much detail we put into things, how much we think about even the smallest of door closes or something like that. How many different layers of sound can that have? Can it have a character to it? Can it have movement in the sound? As an Englishman, I'm very proud to have Monty Python as one of our exports, but a lot of people still think, there's the coconut hooves that is that's a horse, that's it. But there's not. There's so many levels of detail that go into things like that, and I think that's obviously something that's missed in our job that people aren't really aware of.
And Brent?
I ask people when they ask, what does he do, or how can I understand what is he doing? I ask them, imagine if you've ever had noise canceling headphones, maybe you're on an airplane or something, you turn the noise cancellation on, everything goes away. Now turn it off and don't talk. All the stuff you hear next, we bring to the table for your show that you're watching that you enjoy, because the focus of the shooting day is to capture the dialogue, to capture the story that they're telling us, the script, the words. The microphones are not pointing at their feet. The microphones are not pointing at the car going by in the background, or the refrigerator that's about to lose its compressor fan or something. So all of that environment that we're building to tell the story, we're telling, we can tell somebody's condition of their life, their emotional state, by their surroundings, by their ambience. Somebody could be down on their luck. So maybe we make their car door a little rusty, a creaky, and it flaps a little bit. And by the end of the show, they've won and they've succeeded. Well, maybe that door doesn't flap anymore. Maybe there's no more squeak when they open and close the door. It's the same door, but we get to take that story trip with sound. And so it's just the understanding that it's not all captured on the microphone on the day it was produced. I talked to an actor once and I told him, oh, hey, I edit your dialogue. And he said, what's wrong with my dialogue? This is an actor. So there's a lot that's not fully understood about what has to happen to make it presentable, make it broadcastable, something can be exhibited and enjoyed as a story. Without that, it's just somebody on the street with a microphone and you get what you get. A siren goes by. But in what we're doing, everything you hear is intentional. If there's a siren there, we put the siren there as part of the story. It's not an accident.
And Paul, how about you?
Well, it definitely is an Oz moment, that behind the curtain. And that's how I think all of us here love it. When someone just says, like we said, just went for a ride, and you watch, something, then you go, when you ask your family or friends or colleagues, how was it? And they'll, I have to go back and look at it, because it's just, so much of it is lost in the storytelling. And that's when the oral focus of things, as we can push and pull eye lines, and as was said here, the emotions back and forth. And once you have them in your hand, and you've done, we've all done our job. We've really helped the storyteller from script on come to life, and that's, I think that's super important, and I love when it's lost, and I just want to be that guy behind the magic curtain until it's award time maybe, or colleagues go, hey, what did you do there? And you go, well, let me tell you, 686 tracks of sound effects on Autopsy or something. I think that's where we were at. We were pushing a lot of elements, and a lot that gets lassoed and muted until so those decisions, those grand decisions that you go, okay, this isn't serving our story. So let's go in that fork in the road, which I like that analogy. So that's it.
Mm. Well, thank you all so much for chatting with us today. I learned so much about what you do and your profession, and Emmy nominations are coming up. So best of luck to each and every one of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.